Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into the foundational concepts of economics to figure out how our everyday individual human desires actually end up shaping the well-being of entire nations. I mean, we interact with the economy constantly, right? Every single time we grab a coffee or cash a paycheck. But today, we're popping the hood to see how all those moving parts actually connect.
Here is the game plan. We'll start with our endless personal wants, see how we satisfy them through utility and markets, zoom out to the big macroeconomic picture, and wrap up with the million-dollar question: does more wealth actually equal more welfare?
Okay, Section 1. Endless wants, limited reality. Let's just start at the absolute baseline of all economic activity, which is human desire.
So in economics, there's a huge difference between just daydreaming about something and having a true, actionable want. A mere desire for, say, a brand new Honda City car only becomes an economic want if you're actually ready to put in the effort, like, working to earn an income to get it. It's that action-oriented desire that literally kickstarts the whole economic machine.
And what's really fascinating here is how our wants just multiply. They constantly stay one step ahead of availability. And that is what drives the scarcity and value at the very heart of economics. Think about it for a second. Our wants are totally endless, and they're always competing for our limited income. Sometimes they're complementary. Like, if you buy that car, suddenly you really need petrol too. Sometimes they're substitutable. If you're thirsty, a juice or a soda might both do the trick. But the craziest feature is that human wants consistently outpace the goods we actually have available. Companies totally use this. By creating hype and limited releases, brands maintain a demand that completely crushes supply, which keeps customers super eager and willing to pay a premium.
Moving right along to Section 2, creating and consuming utility. Now that we know what we want, we have to look at how we actually get satisfaction from those things.
Economists use a specific word for this want-satisfying power: utility. We usually think of production as giant factories making physical objects, but actually, it's way broader than that. Production is simply the process of adding utility to something so it can satisfy a want. A carpenter provides form utility by turning raw, useless wood into a functional table. A truck driver gives us place utility by moving goods from some faraway factory right to your local shop. A warehouse creates time utility by storing items safely until we actually need them. And then you have professionals like doctors and teachers providing service utility.
Now, this brilliantly illustrates what's called the law of diminishing marginal utility. Imagine tracking your satisfaction as you eat mangoes. That first mango, absolute pure bliss. By the time you eat the third one, it's still good, adding about 4 units of satisfaction, or utils, to your total. But keep going. By the fifth mango, you get 0 additional satisfaction. You're just full. And by that sixth mango, the marginal utility actually goes negative. You haven't just lost satisfaction, you've literally gained a stomachache. That's disutility right there, proving that more isn't always better.
All right, Section 3. Markets, prices, and money. To actually trade all these goods with their varying levels of utility, we had to build systems of exchange.
Imagine trying to survive in a barter economy. If you had wheat and you wanted rice, you couldn't just find anyone with rice. You had to find someone with rice who specifically wanted your wheat. Economists call this the double coincidence of wants. And honestly, it made transactions incredibly painful and slow. We solved this massive headache by moving to a money economy. Because money is universally accepted, it just completely eliminates that reciprocal demand problem. You sell your wheat for cash, you use the cash to buy rice. Boom. Simple, seamless, and a total game changer.
And when you bring buyers with money and sellers with goods together, they negotiate. Right there at the exact sweet spot where the downward-sloping demand curve and the upward-sloping supply curve cross paths, you find the equilibrium price. That is the exact magical point where the quantity buyers want perfectly matches what sellers are offering.
Which brings us to Section 4, zooming out to the macro economy. Having mastered the micro-level stuff, human wants, mangoes, market prices, let's pull the camera way back and look at the entire economic machine at the national scale. To measure a massive dynamic economy, economists rely on 2 different lenses: stock variables and flow variables. Think of stock variables like a photograph. They measure things frozen at a very specific point in time, like checking your inventory on exactly January 1st. Flow variables, on the other hand, are much more like a video. They measure activity happening over a stretch of time, like the total supply of food grains produced throughout a whole month.
And the single most important flow variable we track is national income. This is the total monetary value of all the final goods and services a country's residents produce over an entire year. It acts as a massive indicator for a country's economic development and gives us a pretty good idea of the average living standard of its people.
But as we all know from watching the news, this national income isn't just a perfectly stable line that only goes up. It experiences these recurrent fluctuations known as the business cycle. Entire economies are basically on a continuous roller coaster. We see prosperity and expansion, which eventually peaks and then falls into a recession. If that recession is severe enough, it plunges into a depression before finally hitting rock bottom and entering a recovery phase. Output, employment, income, they are all strapped into this ride.
Finally, Section 5, Wealth versus True Welfare. This is where we untangle the really complex relationship between the wealth the nation generates and the actual well-being its people experience.
Let's get our definition straight first. Welfare is fundamentally a sense of satisfaction, happiness, and well-being among people. It's a feeling, and it climbs rapidly when we have more consumption, better weather, more leisure time, and a high degree of security. But conversely, it can fall off a cliff in the face of natural disasters, political instability, or a loss of freedom, and that happens regardless of how much money you might actually have in the bank. So, how are wealth and welfare actually interlinked? Well, the primary textbook assumption is a direct correlation. Social welfare depends on national social wealth. Economists generally assume that as a nation's wealth increases, its welfare increases right alongside it. The thinking is that any negative side effects are basically outweighed by the positive benefits. And conversely, the assumption goes that when national wealth drops, social welfare naturally falls with it.
But to really grasp this well-being index, we have to break it down into 3 distinct classes. First up is economic welfare. This is the part of social well-being that can be directly or indirectly measured in money terms. It's driven by national income and consumption. Second, we have non-economic welfare. These are the monetary exempt factors that deeply affect us, like a clean environment, our personal freedom, and our social relations. Finally, there's social welfare. This is the ultimate goal, the sum total of all individual happiness in a society, blending both the economic and non-economic welfare together. Which leaves us with a really fascinating paradox. The strict economic textbooks say welfare naturally falls when a nation's wealth drops. But we just saw that non-economic factors, like our family relations, our community bonds, our freedom, play a huge, massive part in our overall happiness. It really makes you wonder, if national wealth drops during a recession, does our true social welfare actually have to fall with it? Or can a society be rich in welfare even when its pockets are temporarily empty? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I will leave you to chew on that one.